Good morning. I'm Dr. Richard Pineda, the chair of the Department of Communication at the University of Texas, El Paso. This morning for the Chamber Talk series, I'm lucky enough to have CEO and President David Jerome with me. David, as many of you know, has been at the Chamber now for 2 years. Under his watch, the Chamber in its scope and impact in El Paso has grown tremendously. And some of what David has brought to the table is his own experience as a leader, both with General Motors and a number of multinational corporations that have worked across not only geography, but across crisis. And so for this Friday, we wanted to have a conversation that was driven largely by looking at questions of leadership, but also, and for those of you that are watching, we are recording for a graduate seminar, but also to hear a little bit of the perspective that David brings to the table, not only on leadership broadly, but in times of leadership crisis. And so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, David. How are you?
Great, Dr. Pineda. How are you today?
Well, I'm doing pretty well, all things considered. I mean, we're doing everything sort of on the fly, and so my home office is now also my home recording studio, is also my university office, is also my writing space. So I think we're all kind of in the same boat these days.
Yes, it's the home headquarters, a trend for sure we'll be talking more about, I'm sure. But yeah, leadership is one of those things that I think, the old joke is we don't need another book on management. And certainly I'm not sure we need one on management and leadership either. But I do think times of crisis do take something that even in the best of times, I think is challenging, which is how to be a good leader. But I think the makes it much more so. And as you know, the Chamber thinks an awful lot about leadership at this point. We, or any for that matter, we have a leadership class that we host, which is a lot of folks that are new leaders in their own right and up and coming leaders that we really want to introduce to El Paso, but also to leadership skills and management skills that will serve them well throughout their career. And one of the things that we really do try is sort of underlying effort, as you know, because we've worked on this with you directly in terms of how we put this together, is we really do want to get folks comfortable with the idea that change is the new norm. And not just being able to cope with it, but actually be able to thrive in change. Now, I'm not sure that would apply to a landscape-wide sort of crisis like we have here, which is why I thought it would be useful for you and I to have this conversation, because I think this becomes the kind of thing that goes way beyond those traditional sort of ways of thinking. The new normal, at least particularly when we're in the middle of a storm like this crisis, I think is going to have to put a heavy premium on things like adaptability, even more than we would normally try to emphasize such a thing. So I do think this is an important conversation to have, and I look forward to having it with you now.
Fantastic. Well, so with that in mind, and given some of the work that you have done already, both in terms of your personal experience in leadership, and then having chances to kind of think about what that means, I guess the first question for you is, in terms of the best leaders, period, what are the qualities that are significant that are directly applicable to leaders in times of crisis? I mean, so we know that a leader will bring a variety of dynamic skills to the table, but from your experience and what you've seen, what's the one or two kind of hallmark pieces that are important for leaders that are dealing with a crisis, and a crisis, I think, as kind of the extreme form of the change that you're talking about?
Exactly right. It is extreme, and I think that I think you're probably best at maybe thinking about two things in terms of this right now. One is I think it's very hard to overcome a bias that we all have, which is, well, this is normal. I see that quite a bit, although I think most companies are making fairly prudent decisions right now. I still do encounter a lot of folks that think, well, this is just an emergency, or this is this is just the way things have always been. It's actually not. And I think coming to grips with that fact is not easy, but the sooner you do it, the sooner you can start working on a proper plan that'll allow you to begin to not only get through this crisis, but begin to think about the other side of it, which I think as a leader, you have no choice but to do if you want to responsibly, push your company forward. Is you're going to have to come to grips with this issue properly, address the current problems, and start thinking about the future. Which is always, I think, sort of hard to do in the middle of a storm. But the other thing that I would emphasize, in addition to facing the facts, as it were, I think the other thing that I think is important is how you do this. This is a human tragedy of unprecedented scale. Being empathetic is more important now than ever, and that should be a priority. But I think it's also how you lead. Your character is going to make a big difference at this point too. So I think being calm, cool, and collected is a big part of the approach that you should take too, leading by example, in other words. And that allows hopefully an environment where your team can begin to discuss ideas and concerns without too much worry about failure, and so much is that's really not what should be the problem here, or the concern is, what are you going to do? What is your team going to push going forward? How you lead and what you do will be a big part of that. Be transparent with them. And I would guess maybe the only other thing I would say about that is that try to balance confidence with credibility. This is a problem. It's going to be difficult. It's okay to say so. And facing that reality in a transparent way with your team enhances your credibility, and I think allows you to focus on the real problem, which is how you're going to get through this.
So you have shared with me some of the experiences you've had globally, and I'm thinking in particular of one of the stories you told me about being in Korea and dealing with domestic economic pressure. To a certain extent, a large company like GM obviously has contingency plans that are complicated, that are very dynamic, that probably address a menu of A to Z in terms of different issues. But thinking about the El Paso Chamber and a large portion of your membership, these small and medium enterprises, a lot of times leaders in those organizations where you may be an army of one or just a smaller cluster of folks, how do you suggest leaders in those capacities develop out their contingency plan? And obviously we're in the thick of something now, but how does somebody in an SME test the stress of their organization and develop a solid contingency plan?
Well, I think the thing that we have to note is that this is not a normal circumstance. And when you think about it that way, we know that almost anything that's going to be recommended to a company at this point, internally or externally, is going to come in the context really of trying to improvise. And the question is when you're in a situation like this, where all your contingency planning, all your scenario planning, if you were even able to do it, because let's be honest, for small and medium enterprises, small and medium-sized enterprises, pardon me, that's hard to do. But nonetheless, even if you have them, I think this is uncharted territory for virtually everybody, large enterprises or not. I mean, even the government, we know, I think it's safe to say that this virus has moved faster than decision-making at just about every level. And so you're going to be improvising. So the question becomes how to do that. What tools do you have in your toolbox, as it were, personally or as an enterprise, just to improvise well? And I think I think that's going to be a couple of things. The very first thing is the original part of the improvise is a stylistic kind of thing where you come in and say, we're in the middle of a fire. I'm just going to tell you where the exit is. So you could be fairly directive in so much is sit down with your team, and we are in a crisis. You need to be aware of this, and we're going to need to change the way things operate because we have to address it. Now, in my experience, the next phase of this, as it were, would shift to something that I think becomes much more teams focused than traditional command and control. At some levels, if you really do want to be able to react to this well, you're going to have to be able to rely on your team and push down authority and try to allow them to address these issues quickly, because this is a fast moving thing for your enterprise. So how do you do that? Well, the best way to do that, I think, is to set up sort of a different mode of operation that's much more team focused. And as you know, and we've sort of discussed this at the chamber, and anybody who's familiar with the chamber knows that we traditionally look at ourselves organized around sort of 4 pillars, which is how do we connect, coach, advocate, and innovate for our members in our community. Well, in this context, I think we've had to change that and morph into a much more team focused kind of activity that is less derived around those 4 pillars and much more focused in on, how do we sort of have like a nerve center sort of approach, like the team of teams. And then underneath that, we are very focused on, let's say, 3 things for us, which are first and foremost, our workforce, our team, to make sure they're protected during this context. And what do we need to do there? The other thing that we've shifted to, of course, is our members and our community. So how do we make sure that we are reaching out to our members in ways that are useful, like this call, for example, that we're having? And then the other bit, I think, is financial stress testing, which even for the chamber, we have to do. So I would, as a minimum, recommend companies, small or large, look at themselves, at least in those new ways in terms of teams. Some companies, obviously, unlike the chamber, but most enterprises will have to add, whether you're small or large, I think some kind of supply chain silo or team to that mix as well. And if you allow them to be flexible and quick in the response, I think that's the best way to sort of approach. So you're going to have to change the way you do business, command and control, and move to teams. And teams are uncomfortable because a lot of companies don't really have a lot of experience with them. But I think, we don't have a lot of experience with conference calling and video calls either. We're learning how to do that, and we're going to have to learn how to push responsibility down for speed and also be more transparent and comfortable with a flatter sort of approach, so that you can get the speed and the things you need to, and the discipline also to still get things done. But it's a new world, and it's going to require some new thinking.
Great. Well, that is the first 10 minutes that we wanted to record for a graduate seminar. I want to use the next 10 minutes to go through a quick series of questions just to get your insight, David. So one of the things that I think is probably hard for most people to think about in a leadership capacity right now is to start thinking about lessons learned. But clearly, one of the things that I think different level enterprises and certainly organizations need to think about is how to start collecting information and how to start thinking about the eventual after action report. I mean, some things, we'll learn on the fly and figure out how to do, but there's going to be a moment, I think, for business leaders and leaders across organizations to kind of step back and say, okay, what did we learn and how do we organize that? What's your advice for that? I mean, how do you start collecting? What markers, I guess, would you be looking at, or metrics in terms of leadership and in terms of organizations that you would want to start collecting now, so that in 3 months or 6 months, as we kind of get over the hump on this or any crisis, that you could then start developing a new contingency or updated contingency plan?
Well, I think that a couple of things are sort of percolating at this point, I think, or should be within your company, as you're trying to look at how to handle something like this. And interestingly, I do think there are some, let's say, basic steps you could follow that would be useful for anybody to begin to think about. But I think, the very first thing you should be doing, I mean, in that kind of regard, is trying to prioritize or identify, obviously, the key risks that you have. I would, run your contingencies or sensitivities against that. So what is it that you're worried about? So, like, for example, at the chamber, we can't host some of our large events. So what are we going to do? What are the contingencies you want to put in place to deal with that? I also think it's very important, and we were sort of talking about this in the first half of this interview, I think it's also very important that you be looking at those risks in terms of how you conduct your financial stress testing. So you want to put in place an understanding of how these things are spilling out, and for your organization, and put in some triggers almost for where you think you need to be. So in other words, when my cash position hits a certain point, this means I have to make this change. And so as your contingencies are set up around your risks, you should also have your financial trigger set up around that as well. And then I think maybe you could sort of sit down and really think about developing a resilience plan based on what to do after that. So you understand your risk, you understand your sort of scenarios that you've got to play, or your set of let's say contingencies, to use your language, and then you've looked at your financials and the triggers that you think need to be in place around that. Then I think you could put together your sort of plan for where you come out of that. So what kind of resilience do I need to put in place to sort of address a resilience plan to go after that? So that would be sort of my suggested roadmap for how you approach it. And it's going to be different for different enterprises. I mean, I was looking at some things earlier, and I mean, I can't imagine what the regulatory environment is going to look like in the healthcare area after this crisis has gone by. So that the thinkers in healthcare are already looking at what's resilience going to look like for that industry after this crisis.
So one of the things that you've talked about, and I know that you also teach a graduate seminar in talent acquisition and maintenance of that talent. How do you cultivate leadership in times of crisis, especially in an organization? I mean, what would you be thinking about, and what would you suggest chamber members be thinking about in terms of cultivating folks down the line? Because I mean, obviously, there's going to be some initial priority and initial reaction for leaders to deal with the crisis at hand, but you also need to think about how you start working on that second level of leadership. So how do you cultivate leadership in times of crisis?
Well, I think that cultivating leadership is always, I actually do believe leaders are born and trained, that you can do both. And leadership styles are, I think, something that, for example, if people understand and become self-aware about how they perform, I think that allows them quite a bit of strength as they want to try to flex around different ways of approaching things. Leadership is often very contextual in my mind, I guess is what I'm really trying to say. And if I were to think about it from a crisis perspective more than anything, I would say that you really do need, in the context of a situation like this, to be open to leadership coming from anywhere. As people get stressed and things of this sort, especially in a situation like this, I think you're often surprised and very gratified to know that you have emerging leaders in your team that surface and show themselves to be quite excellent under pressure. And you should be open to that and encourage and bring them along and make sure that you invest in them as well. But I do think that as you look at teams and you begin to delegate, it creates an environment of trust. When you push down authority, and that trust does lead to greater delegation and quicker speed and the ability to have the adaptability required to be successful. And those would be traits that I would be looking for in future leaders. And you should be open to those future leaders coming from anywhere in your organization, because they will emerge much faster in a crisis than you might see otherwise, I think.
So we have, I think, time for one last topic, one last question for you. I think for a lot of folks in leadership positions, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety right now. Some of it is the uncertainty of the moment. Some of it is the additional pressure. And some of it is, I think, just a change in modality. I mean, now having to do meetings and work from home, and it's really changed responsibilities in terms of the amount of time I think that people are putting into their various occupations. But I guess my last question for you is, when it comes to leadership, that sort of look in the mirror moment. What's the piece of advice that you'd want to pass on to leaders at this particular moment, in terms of whether it's juggling their priorities in the organization or if it's trying to make sense of the world? I mean, what's the piece of advice that you would that maybe you yourself are using at this particular moment, or that you would pass on to leaders at this particular time?
I think the maybe two bits of I think advice is I think that sort of that humility thing that is also important. You know, you have to be able to look in the mirror and understand your role in issues, and also understand, like we were saying earlier, that I think overconfidence in this kind of time is not in a crisis such as this is not necessarily what is called for. Being able to acknowledge that you're in a crisis and being able to be transparent with your team, trust them, and push down authority, I think is where the leadership needs to be skillful. And being able to do that over a conference call is not easy. But I think if you keep teams discreet, you keep it clear what they're up to, you have to set a vision, and then I think put a very heavy premium on communications and transparency, and trying to make sure that you keep them all in the position of trying to get answers to all the questions that exist. And it's okay to be open about that. But that's that humility, and I think, let's say, some degree of cautious optimism bound together. Those two things will, I think, serve us well through this crisis as leaders.
Well, thank you so much, David. This has been another Chamber Talk. We hope that you find these to be instructive and interesting, and if nothing else, get your mind off of things at the particular moment. This will be on the Chamber's Facebook page. If you have suggestions or ideas, you're welcome to put those in the comment list below the Facebook link. And of course, if you've got messages, you can direct those to the Facebook message page for the Chamber. I'm Dr. Richard Pineda, the chair of the Department of Communication at the University of Texas at El Paso. Have a great day.